إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة. I would like to give you a homework actually with this khutbah, and I would want you to really do this seriously. And that is, I want you, for your own benefit, to read Surah Ali Imran from 118 to 160. If you need a translation, read it with translation. It's really important. It will give you a perspective. It will answer you so many of your questions. Again, Ali Imran, which is Surah 3, Ayah 118 or 117 to 160. And I will explain some of what this surah teaches us. But before, whenever we are in a situation where we have a fitna, or we have a crisis, or where we have trials and tribulations anywhere in the Islamic world, we need to resort to the Qur'an. Because one of the ways how that makes you deal with the grief and the sadness and the confusion is reading the Qur'an. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that whenever you have that grief, you say, Allahumma inni abduk, oh Allah, I am your servant, wabnu abdik, and the son of your servant, wabnu amatik, and the son of your servant, your mom. Nasiyati biyadik, my forelock is in your hands. Madin fiya hukmuk, your judgment upon me will come to pass. Adnun fiya qada'uk, your qada, your decree upon me is just. As'aluka bi kulli ismin huwa lak, I ask you with every name that you have. Sammayta bihi nafsak, that you named yourself. Aw anzaltahu fi kitabik, or you revealed it in your book. Aw allamtahu ahadan min khalqik, or taught it to one of your servants. Aw ista'tharta bihi fi ilm al-ghayb indak, or kept it for you, not revealing it to anyone. And تجعل القرآن العظيم ربيع قلبي, that you make the Qur'an the spring of my heart. Why? Because your heart is confused. Your heart is in turmoil. And the only way you get your heart to calm down and quell and understand what's going on is reading the book of Allah. And Allah will open your heart and you will see things clearly. I wanted to talk about this issue, but before I get there, in Surah Al-Baqarah, since we are going to the Qur'an to find answers, the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah divided people into three categories: the believers, the non-believers, and the hypocrites. And what did He talk about the believers? He says, الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون. They are the ones who believe in the unseen, believe in a world that is not with us, believe in the afterlife, believe in Allah and the angels and everything that Allah told us to believe in, that we cannot see or we cannot feel. And also they believe in what Allah revealed in the book in the Qur'an and what He revealed in the books before the Qur'an. So that is the believers. So that is what they do. And it doesn't change. No matter what events happen, no matter what happens in their life, all these things have been communicated to you as a believer. Then He described the non-believers. And He said that no matter what you tell them, their hearts are sealed. You can't have a conversation sometimes with them. Especially when their hearts are sealed, they're set on their ways. How many times I had conversations about, trying to convince people about what's happening, and they just shout, nod and shake their heads, and finally they go on their way. They're set on their ways. Whatever they believe in, they believe in. They're not going to change. Because they did not want guidance. And then the hypocrites. And Allah described them in 13 verses of the Qur'an, the hypocrites who are among the Muslims. And these are the ones that we should beware of. Now, I came up with questions that through the answers of these questions, I will be able, inshallah, to give some understanding from a believer perspective. The question number one is, how do these events impact the believer? How do they impact you? You get sad, yes. You have emotions. You get angry. But what do? You resort to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you ask Allah for guidance. Because we always say, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. We need to mean it. When we ask Allah to guide us to the straight path, what He says, I read when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described those who resort to prayer and who are patient, He described them as أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون. They are the ones upon whom Allah's mercy and blessings will descend. And they are the ones who are rightly guided. They sought guidance and Allah gave them guidance. One of the best things that I read by Sheikh Ibn Ashur rahimahullah, he says, يَسْأَلُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْهِدَايَةَ مِنَ اللَّهِ. The believers will ask guidance from Allah. فَإِذَا اهْتَدَوْا. When they are guided, لَمْ تُزْعِجْهُمُ الْمَصَائِبِ وَلَمْ تَكُنْ لَهُمْ حَاجِبًا عَنِ التَّحَقُّقِ فِي مَقَامِ الصَّبْرِ لِعِلْمِهِمْ أَنَّ الْحَيَاةَ لَا تَخْلُو مِنَ الْأَقْدَارِ. He says, when they are guided, when their hearts are guided, that tribulations and trials and fitness in this life will not face them, will not bother them. Maybe they will get a little bothered by them, but it will not change them. It will even get them more straight on the path. And it will not keep them away from being patient. Because they know that Allah created this life on this earth with trials and tribulations, with difficulties and hardships, with fitness, with miseries, with hardship, basically. It is common. That is the nature of this life. The nature of this life is like, it will break you. It will break you. But a believer does not get broken in their heart. His heart stays firm. And they read the book of Allah. They rush to worship Allah. They seek Allah with dua and good deeds. And they do what they're supposed to do. As believers, what Allah tells them to do. Now, how do these events impact the hypocrites? What do the hypocrites do? Or the weak ones? He says, وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ لَمْ يَهْتَدُوا. He says, as for those who are not guided, or refuse to be guided, فَهُم يَجْعَلُونَ الْمَصَائِبَ سَبَبًا فِي اعْتِرَاضِهِمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ أو كفرهم به أو قول ما لا يليق به أو شكهم في صحة الإسلام. يقولون لو كان هذا هو الدين المرضي لله لما لحقنا عذاب أو مصيبة. وهذا شأن أهل الضلال من الكفار والمنافقين. He says, as for those who refuse to be guided, the hypocrites and everyone who's weak in their iman, they will be shaken. They will be shaken. They will even start using the masayib, or the trials and the difficulties that happen, these events that happen, to blame Allah. And they say, maybe we're not on the right path. Maybe Islam is not on the right path. If it were, Allah would not do this to the Muslims. They would say that sometimes, and you hear it from so many people. And they start doubting Allah. They start saying things about Allah that they're not supposed to be saying, because Allah told them exactly the nature of this life. It's not like Allah didn't tell you that life. He didn't tell you that you're going to live here forever, a happy ever after. He didn't tell you that. He didn't tell you that. He told you it's going to be hard. He told you that وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. He told you that already. That He will test you with loss of life, and make you afraid and make you worry. There's no guarantee that this life is going to be happy for you. And Allah told you, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. He may give it to you, or He may give it to someone else to test you, to test the believer, and to destroy the non-believer. How do you think Allah sometimes destroys the non-believer? By giving them more and more and more and more until they hang themselves with it, until they're destroyed. So, and they say what they used to say to Musa, وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَطَّيَّرُوا بِمُوسَى. When something bad happens to them, they will say, it's because of Musa. It's the superstition of Musa. And Musa has bad luck on us. If we never had him, we would have been living a better life. Or what the hypocrites of Medina used to say, وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَقُولُوا هَذِهِ مِنْ عِنْدِكَ. That if something bad happens to them, they will tell the Prophet, this is because of you. If we didn't listen to you, our brothers would have been alive by now. Read that Imran, and you will find all these conversations in that surah, as I asked you. It's so interesting because everything is clear that Allah put for us in the Qur'an. Now the next question, did the Ummah of Muhammad experience events like this before? Definitely yes. During the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Prophet was tried so many times. He was tried in Mecca, right? Until they exiled him out of Mecca. They kicked him out of Mecca. He had to leave. So many of his companions died under the torture in Mecca. Then go to Medina, Uhud, which Surah Al-Imran speaks about. What happened? The hypocrites, when they left him, 300 of them left the army and only ended up with 700 only to face 3,000. Or maybe double the number. 2,000 or 3,000 to face them. And the Prophet ﷺ had to face that. And he lost his uncle. He lost 72 of his companions. Yeah, he got hurt. So yeah, the Prophet went through this difficulty and hardship. And Allah told him that you would think you will go to Jannah without making clear who's believer and who's not believer. That battle of in the Surah Al-Imran, the battle of Uhud, distinguished the believers from the hypocrites. Now the Muslims know who the hypocrites were because of that battle. There's always, whenever you have a situation, you will find who's with you and who's not. Who's honest and who's not. So Jannah is not cheap. And Allah will choose people to be in the higher levels of Jannah. Now go back in the list. The crusade. The crusade stayed with the Muslim Ummah for 90 years, 92 years. And then they left. They couldn't stay. They couldn't stay. The Tartars, they came and stayed for decades, conquering the Muslim nation over 100 years. And finally they were defeated, and they were defeated by a young man, just like that man there. The Tartars came to India and took that young man as a slave. His name was Mahmud Qutuz. They named him Qutuz because he was courageous, only to sell him in slavery to the Ayyubids. And he grew up in Egypt, and he became the leader who defeated them. He was born as a slave from India, from the Khawarizms tribe. And it took him his whole lifetime, and finally he was the leader that got rid of the Tartars. They couldn't stay. And interestingly enough, a lot of the Tartars became Muslim too. Then you go down the list, the colonialism, the invaders from Europe who came and invaded the Muslim nation and stayed there for decades. And finally they had to give up. Algeria gave 1 million martyrs. Algeria by itself. And France said that they would never leave Algeria. They were defeated. They left. All of these examples is to give you hope that no one targets the Muslim Ummah and remains victorious. Why? Because victory will always be for the believers. Allah has promised that. And why? Because the Ummah of believers is an Ummah of faith, not an Ummah of dunya. They're not after the dunya. I mean, the things that if you read what these people did, what these invasions did to the Muslims, you would think that there will be no Muslim on earth, because they attacked the Muslims in such ways that you would think that there's no way they could get up. Just like what they're doing to Gaza now. Annihilation, genocide. But no, they forget that we are saints. And I'm going to use that line. That we grow back up. We bounce back up. It doesn't matter. Muslim Ummah is an Ummah of faith. An Ummah of Aqidah. An Ummah of Ghaib. Because they believe in the promise of Allah. They believe in the promise of Allah. That is the difference. They are undefeatable, indestructible. Because you're talking about Aqidah, a Tawheed. You're talking about the message of Allah. And honestly, through all of this, I was always wondering about one ayah in the Qur'an, when he says, فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفرت طائفة فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. You need to read this ayah in the context of today. فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. The believers will be supported by the promise of Allah. I could never understand the meaning, and that is one of the meanings of that ayah. The believers will always be victorious. It doesn't matter how much you beat them up. You kick them. You bury so many of them. To a believer, our arena is not just this dunya. Our arena is this dunya and the akhirah, because we know what the believer offers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remain in the akhirah. It's not for this dunya. Yet in this dunya, we'll get up and pick ourselves up. So what makes the Muslim Ummah undefeatable? It's the Aqidah. It's the book of Allah, because they always go back to it. They always go back to it. It's the people who come and pray in the masjid 5 times a day, connected with Allah 5 times a day, knowing that Allah tells them, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. Now the next question is, what do Allah and the Messenger tell us to do? And this is what I will talk about, inshallah, in the second khutbah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when something like this happens, we seek guidance from Him, and that Allah will give guidance to us in our hearts. He says, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ فَبِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. Anything that happens to you, O believer, is by the permission of Allah, and you know it. And He told you that Allah knows everything, that Allah is a witness on everything. Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in shaheed. He sees everything. He knows everything. He hears the cries of that man who was looking for his babies, who are all dead under the rubble. He hears the cries of that woman when she prays to Him, "Oh Allah, take revenge for me and my babies, for me and my family. My children died hungry." He hears the cries. He knows. Don't think that Allah likes that. No, He doesn't like that, but He tests the believers, and He chooses people to go to Jannah without hisab and without adhab. So, and He tells us to seek help in prayer and in patience, and that Allah is with you when you're patient, and that He tells you that life is a home of test. That's where you're being tested, and not a home of eternal bliss. No. Life in this dunya is not a home of eternal bliss, and He tells you that everybody's going to die at a certain time. It's their time when they're going to die. Nobody's going to be delayed, and nobody's going to be expedited. They will all everyone will die on the time of their death. And it's an honor that people die on the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's number 2. He tells you that this life on this earth has no value whatsoever. Ask the billionaires when they find themselves in so much misery. Even their money could not bring them happiness. Whereas a believer who comes and prays Fajr in the masjid is filled with happiness. And I like to share a hadith here. المغيرة بن شعبة said, ما سأل أحد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الدجال أكثر مما سألته. He said, no one asked the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم about the liar, about the Antichrist like I did. وإنه قال لي وما يضرك. When I asked him about الدجال, he says, وما يضرك. What makes you afraid of him? Why are you afraid of him? The Prophet is like telling him, you don't need to be afraid of him. Why are you afraid of him? How is he going to hurt you? The Prophet is telling him, indicating that when you have your faith in your heart, how is he going to hurt you? He says, إنهم يقولون إن معه جبل خبز ونهر ماء. He says, they tell me that he has a mountain of bread and a river of water. Because when you are in trials, when you are in difficulty, and when you get hungry, and you see the mountain of bread, that is a big test to you. It is. When you see the water, that is a big test. And that's what they're doing to our brothers and sisters there. Deprive them of water and food and shelter. So it is a test. It is a test. So what did the Prophet tell him? Very comforting. Very comforting. He says, هو أهون على الله من ذلك. He is too little for Allah. More little than even that. He's not going to affect you. None of that's going to affect you. It's telling the believer, don't be distracted by your need for living. I can't believe I said that. Now, seriously. Don't be distracted by your need for living, honestly. Stay on your principles. Stay on your tawheed. Stay on your faith. Stay strong. We ask Allah to keep us strong. We ask Allah to keep us strong and firm. We ask Allah for our brothers and sisters in Gaza to keep them strong and firm, and to tie upon their hearts, because it's a big fitna. It is indeed a big fitna. Allah chooses from His people whom He is going to put in the highest level of Jannah. And it is the sunnah of this dunya that Allah gives it to some, takes it away from some, and gives it to another. But you have to understand, one of Allah's sunnah is that a country based on oppression and injustice and bigotry and discrimination will never last. What did the Prophet ﷺ tell us? And I will conclude with this. 1, he says, عِبَادَةٌ فِي الْحَرْجِ كَهِجْرَةٍ إِلَيْهِ. Worshipping Allah in times of fitna is like migrating to the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because you will be distracted. You will be busy. Your brain is confused. The best way for you to get back, or let's say rebooted, and get back on track with your principles, where you don't change, with your heart is firm, is to worship Allah. Do all kinds of worship, dhikr, fasting, reading Qur'an. And I repeat it, reading Qur'an all the time, because in it, you'll find your answers. You'll find your guidance. Stay away from the sin. Stay away from the sin, because it will take you away from Allah. Sinning will take you away from Allah, which means more confusion and more darkness in your heart. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, بَادِرُوا بِالْأَعْمَالِ الصَّالِحَةِ فَسَتَكُونُ فِتَنًا كَقِطَعِ اللَّيْلِ الْمُظْلِمِ يُصْبِحُ الرَّجُلُ مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا وَيُصْبِحُ كَافِرًا وَيُمْسِي مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي مُؤْمِنًا وَيُصْبِحُ كَافِرًا يَبِيعُ دِينَهُ بِعَرَضٍ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. He says, rush to doing the good deeds. Continue to do the good deeds. Don't stop from doing the good deeds. That pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because there are trials that will come, that will be so dark, that you will be so confused, that a believer will wake up as a believer, and by the end of the day, he will become a non-believer. And he will, by the end of the day, will be a believer, and when he wakes up a non-believer. Why? Because he sells his deen, he sells his soul with a few things of the dunya. Remember, a mountain of bread and a river of water, that's how the Dajjal is going to try to deceive you. When he deprives all the others who are believers, he will say, hey, believe in me, and you'll get the best life you could ever have. Don't be distracted. That's what the Prophet said. How can we resist that? By not stopping the good deeds. And the last one, which is an amazing hadith, he says, إِذَا قَامَتِ السَّاعَةِ وَفِي يَدِ أَحَدِكُمْ فَسِيلَةٌ فَلْيَغْرِسْهَا. If the day of judgment happens, the greatest event you could ever think of happens, and you have a branch of tree in your hand, plant it. What? But the day of judgment is happening. This tree will never grow, will never have fruits. It doesn't matter. You plant it. Why? Because it's about building. It's about doing the good things. It's about building, not destroying. That's what a believer does. He heals, he does not destroy. He heals, does not destroy. That's what a believer does. That's the ethics of a believer. When they meet their enemy, they heal, and they're principled, and they don't destroy. Because all the people are people that Allah created, and we have a responsibility towards them, which is to guide them to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep that in your mind. Read the ayat in Surah Ali Imran and ask Allah all the time to relieve the hardship and the difficulty from the ummah, and especially from our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Allahumma aqsim lana min khashyatika ma tahulu bihi baynana wa bayna ma'siyatik, ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا به جنتك، ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا، ومتعنا اللهم بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقواتنا أبدا ما أبقيتنا، واجعله الوارث منا، واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا، وانصرنا على من عادانا. اللهم لا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا، اللهم لا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا إلى النار مصيرنا، واجعل الجنة هي دارنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم يا قوي يا عزيز يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم، كن لأهلنا في غزة نصيرا ومعينا، اللهم كن لهم نصيرا ومعينا. اللهم اربط على قلوبهم وثبت أقدامهم ووحد كلمتهم. اللهم أنزل عليهم رحماتك، وأنزل عليهم مددك ونصرك ورحمتك وأمنك. اللهم آمنهم في بيوتهم، آمنهم في حواريهم، آمنهم في مدنهم وقراهم. اللهم أطعم جائعهم، وتقبل شهيدهم، واكس عريانهم، وشافي جريحهم. اللهم آوي مشردهم، اللهم آوي مشردهم. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم نصرا مؤزرا. اللهم منزل السحاب، اللهم منزل الكتاب ومجري السحاب وهازم الأحزاب، اهزم الأحزاب والظالمين والمعتدين ومن والاهم. اللهم أرنا فيهم آية من آياتك، وصل اللهم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، وأقم الصلاة.